All right, we are live. So I'd like to first say good afternoon. Thank you all for joining the Sacramento Press Club today. I am Beronda Lyons, Justice Reporter for Cal Matters and a Sacramento Press Club board member. The Press Club is a nonprofit dedicated to helping the next generation of journalists by providing scholarships. I'd like to thank the California Alliance for Jobs for sponsoring today's discussion. Today, we'll hear from U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg about the recently passed federal infrastructure bill and what it means for California. I'd like to welcome our hosts, Nikki Lorenzo of Fox 40 and Chris Majirian of the Los Angeles Times. Without any further delay, I'll hand over the conversation to Nikki Lorenzo of Fox 40. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good to be with you today. Secretary Buttigieg, thank you for joining this conversation. When President Biden signed the infrastructure bill into law, he said, America is moving again, and your life is going to change for the better. So I want to start this discussion off at a 30,000-foot view. We know how much this bill was going to cost, $1.2 trillion. We've seen a breakdown of how it will impact California and some of the money California is going to get, $25 billion for highways, $9 billion for public transit. So just go into a little bit more detail about how Californians will benefit from this.
Well, a state like California that has so many different kinds of communities, coastal and inland, rural and urban, is going to see so much benefit from this investment in our physical infrastructure. We're talking about roads and bridges. We're talking about rail, transit, and buses. We're talking about ports and airports. We're talking about water and internet access, all of the things you need for everything else you need to work. That's how we think about infrastructure, those basic elements that we count on in order to get to where we need to be, in order to move goods. And all of that will see material improvements when we make the repairs, the improvements, and the new investments that this bill is going to make possible. I feel like, especially as I look to my colleagues at the Department of Transportation, there are a lot of people, not just here in the department, but transit authorities, mayors, governors, people who work on transportation, waiting their whole careers for a moment like this, when we have gotten a whole new level of resources to make the kind of tangible improvements that will make it easier, safer, cleaner, fairer, and better to get around in this country.
So here in California, or there in California, since I'm in Washington, D.C., but I used to work in Sacramento. In California, there's one project that stands above all the others. That's the bullet train. There was a grant of $24 million that was provided to the project recently, but that's obviously a drop in the bucket of an incredibly expensive project. And what is the administration prepared to do to see this to completion? Does the administration want to see the bullet train finished? And what will it do to make sure that happens?
Well, our view is that Americans deserve excellent high-speed rail. This is something that people in many, if not most, other developed countries now can expect as a matter of course, almost take for granted. And yet America has lagged behind. And we've lagged behind largely because this country hasn't made the investments that we need to. And that means not only that in any given geography there aren't the kind of resources there ought to be, but also as a country, frankly, we haven't had the kind of muscle memory, the kind of experience that authorities in other countries have been able to build up over decades, which is why, as something of a first mover, I think California has been piloting and pioneering this work and taking on a lot of risk as well. One of the reasons why you see a historic level of commitment to passenger rail, and I should say this isn't all for high speed, but it certainly includes that. One of the reasons you see that in this bill is we do think it's important for the economic competitiveness of the country as a whole, and the opportunity in California is a big example of that. Now, this bill will not single-handedly fund any high-speed rail project. It takes partnerships and collaborations. There will be federal support for a number of high-speed rail efforts. As you mentioned, there's one grant even out of our raise grants that we approved before the bill even passed. It's going to help with a very specific piece of the route here. But this is going to have to require lots of collaboration, lots of partnership, lots of players to actually be a success and to demonstrate that America can do high-speed rail as well as any other country.
Mr. Secretary, along with that project, the bullet train, others that are going to see funds here in California, can you talk about the timeline of when we can see these projects come to fruition, even work starting on them? Because back in 2009, when we saw the stimulus package under the Obama administration, there was that phrase that was focused on shovel ready.
That's right. This is very different from 2009. We're more focused on shovel worthy than I would say shovel ready, because the impetus for the bills are different. In 2009, that legislation was about getting as much money as you could into our economy as quickly as you could. This time around, we're making sure that we're building across the 2020s the kinds of lifelong generational infrastructure investments that are going to set us up for success for the rest of our lives. Now, some of these things do move very quickly. We have existing formula programs that get dollars out to states for improving and fixing roads and bridges, for example. Those dollars flow right away. I mean, we're talking about the 2022, which is now weeks away, being the year when obviously is the first of the 5 years that will be funded through this bill. Other things require us to stand up whole new programs that didn't exist before. Grant programs for resilience, which is an increasing issue, certainly in California, on everything from the threat of wildfires to increased rates of roads being washed out. We need funding to support communities and states that are making their infrastructure more resilient. That's a whole new program. Same thing with the program that we're establishing to set up electric vehicle chargers across the country in a national network. It's going to take a little more time to get ready. If we're talking about a project that has been envisioned for decades to replace a major bridge or tunnel or build a new airport terminal, this is like building a cathedral, but literally within months, you're going to see some of the near term work underway. And the great thing is this bill will be creating jobs, both in the immediate near term and for years and years and years to come.
So one thing you've spoken about is the racial disparities caused by the construction of the highway system. And my colleagues at the LA Times have found that 200,000 people nationwide have been displaced by highway construction in the last 30 years, and the disproportionate impact on Black and Latino communities. How concerning is that to you and the current administration that this has continued to the present day?
Well, it's very concerning. It's something that we need to pay attention to so that these dollars are always doing good, not harm, that they are connecting, not dividing. It's one of the reasons why there is a dedicated $1 billion fund created by this new legislation for reconnecting communities, the very places that were sometimes cut up or broken up or divided by infrastructure decisions in the past. But it's not just about what qualifies for that $1 billion program. It's making sure across the hundreds of billions of dollars that are going to be invested in communities across the country, that we do it in a way that actually hears from on the ground, that it listens to the needs of the communities. And importantly, we're generally not talking about infrastructure projects that are going to be designed and invented here in this building in Washington, D.C., and then imposed on communities. They will be coming from communities, from cities, from states, from transit agencies, proposing what they believe will best serve their community members. And we're going to oversee a process to ensure that those communities have been heard as these plans are being put together.
And what does that process look like? And you mentioned that $1 billion, but there's much, much more money than that that could be used for highway expansions, hundreds of billions of dollars. So it seems like that money that could be expanding highways could very much outweigh the money used to connect the communities.
Right, which again is why we need to make sure that every penny of the federal money that's going out here goes out on equitable terms and in inclusive ways. Part of what we're doing is we are building up a Department Office of Civil Rights here at USDOT. It's been there a long time, but when I arrived, as you might expect, under the previous administration, it was not fully staffed and not very empowered. And by the way, we're using authorities like Title VI of civil rights law with a view toward wanting to get it right in the first place. A much better outcome than enforcing on a state or authority that gets it wrong is working with them to make sure that they don't get it wrong to begin with. And that's something that we're going to be paying close attention to in the spirit of making sure that we really are enhancing and not reducing equity and opportunity through these dollars.
I want to ask you about electric vehicles. You mentioned the charging stations. This is going to be kind of a two-part question. I'm going to start with the executive order that Governor Newsom signed last year, and then I'm going to have you comment on some remarks made by Elon Musk. But I want to start with Governor Newsom because he signed an executive order last year banning new gas-powered cars by 2035. Obviously, there's going to have to be some infrastructure in California that's going to be put into place. And you've also mentioned in your remarks when you've been out on the road selling this infrastructure bill is to bring the cost down of those electric vehicles. So can you just break that down a little bit more?
That's right. Yeah. So two pieces we're really focused on right now in terms of the difference we can make. Part one is in the law that was just signed. That is including funds for about 500,000 electric chargers to be installed across the country. We are going to be working to make sure that we have the kind of network effects you really need so that nobody thinks twice about buying an electric vehicle because they're not sure that it has the range to get to where they need to go. And it's going to be challenging. The places where electric vehicle chargers ought to go is not the exact same as where gas stations ought to be. Sometimes it could be, but not automatically. And so there's a lot of work to do to get that right. That's part one, chargers where they need to be. Part two is buying down the cost of electric vehicles to begin with. And that's one of the reasons why the Build Back Better legislation, the part that's moving through Congress and being negotiated in the Senate right now, includes a proposal to reduce those costs by up to $12,500. So you take electric pickup trucks like the kind that were at the factory where the president visited earlier this year. The price point, and this is a really, really good truck, the price point on that is about $40,000. That's out of reach for a lot of families, including rural drivers who would actually benefit the most from having an electric vehicle because they've been the ones driving the longest distances and burning the most gas, but only if they could afford it. So buying the cost down from $40,000 to $28,000 means millions more families would be able to afford it than without that incentive. And we think it's very important to do what we can to reduce those costs. First of all, so that more families right away can buy these vehicles, but also because that means more of them will be sold, more of them will be built. And over time, that means they'll be cheaper to produce and less expensive for everybody without any government intervention at all.
Do you think 2035, 15 years is going to be enough time to ban new gas cars in California? Do you think the governor is a little ambitious?
Well, look, we welcome climate ambition at a time when there is a climate crisis. Different cities, different states are taking different approaches. As a federal government, the president has laid down a goal of making sure that half of all new vehicles sold by 2030 are going to be zero emission vehicles. And, in our federal system, one thing that we really welcome, often we'll set a floor at the federal level about what we think is necessary for the country. But when states want to try things or decide to do things that are right for the state, that's certainly something that can help accelerate progress in many policy areas, including fighting climate change.
Okay, I want to ask you about Elon Musk now. You had a little bit of a back and forth. Elon Musk came out this week and called the $7.5 billion included in the recently approved bipartisan infrastructure law unnecessary. He said, quote, "Do we need support for gas stations? We don't. There's no need for a support of a charging network. I would delete it. Delete. I'm literally saying get rid of all subsidies also for oil and gas." I'm going to just go out on a limb here and say you disagree with that.
Well, Tesla's a company that was built with support from federal subsidies. So I think it's important to recognize the big picture here, which is that there is a policy interest in accelerating the adoption of electric vehicles in this country, in making sure that those electric vehicles are made in America, in making sure that the jobs associated with them are on American soil, and frankly, making sure it happens faster than market forces alone can deliver, for the simple reason that we can't afford to wait. The climate crisis is not going to give us enough time for a slow, plodding adoption curve of EVs. We need to accelerate it. And that was good policy with the last round of EV incentives that made it possible for a lot of companies, including Tesla, to do the kind of growth and innovation that they did. And it's true going forward as we work to make sure that that electric vehicle revolution is happening on the kind of terms that are really going to benefit America and benefit climate the most.
So speaking of electric vehicles, obviously electric vehicles don't use gas, and gas taxes are a primary way to pay for road upkeep. California has been studying replacing the gas tax with vehicle mile traveled fee. Is that something that you support? Is that something the federal government should consider on a national level? What are your thoughts on making that transition? And if you do think that's a good idea, how long do you think the transition should take?
Well, when it came to funding this infrastructure bill, the president came out of the gate with a very clear commitment that it was not going to involve raising taxes on anyone making less than $400,000 a year. And we were able to keep to that commitment and fund this $1.2 trillion vision for America's future without any kind of introduction of new fees or taxes. And I think that's an important principle throughout this administration as we're funding all kinds of different things that we're looking at, not just the transportation things that I get to work on, but the childcare investments, the pre-K investments, all of the things that we think are necessary to really prepare American families to thrive in the future. And that sense of tax fairness is something that I think Americans understand and echo, especially at a moment when, look, we don't even have to go there if we know the money being left on the table through giant corporations able to pay $0 in taxes on billions of dollars in profits. As long as a teacher or a firefighter pays more, and I don't mean more in terms of percentage, I mean a higher sum of dollars than a multi-billion-dollar corporation, there's clearly other places in our tax code we can look to fund important priorities.
So speaking of tax fairness, somebody who drives a Tesla is using the same road as somebody who is driving their pickup truck to their day job, but they're not paying for the upkeep of that road. They're not paying the gas tax. What is that fair, and should that be changed, and how should that be changed?
Well, some states have decided to assess on an electric vehicle in a different way to try to normalize that. But I think if you're going to go down the road, you should remember, no pun intended, you should remember that there are other costs associated with any kind of vehicle that operates by setting fossil fuels on fire inside an engine. And those costs include a lot of the economic consequences of social and health implications of particulate matter, pollution, and of course, climate change itself. So I'm not sure there's really been a true apples to apples look at this. But what I do know is that we just found a way to finance $1.2 trillion of infrastructure investment without asking anybody making less than $400,000 a year to put a penny into it, because the president feels like folks like that are paying enough.
Mr. Secretary, of course, we have the midterms coming up next year. This infrastructure bill is a big win for the president. Obviously, you've outlined how this will affect Californians. It's going to affect people a lot, in other states as well. Is there pressure for cabinet members like you and others to go out and sell, what the Biden agenda has accomplished so far? Because there's all this discussion of control of the House and in Congress, and if Democrats will maintain control, because this infrastructure bill, it's one of two. So, we talk about the roads and the bridges, but there's also this part two of Build Back Better that deals with paid family leave and what's dubbed human infrastructure.
That's right. So even though it's got less to do with transportation proportionally, I'm very excited about part two as well, because it's going to be transformative for what it's like to raise a family in this country, to cut the cost of childcare in half for most families, to put more money in the pockets of American families through that child tax credit, to deliver free pre-K for 3 and 4-year-olds. And we're talking about really big, really important changes, as well as that electric vehicle policy that I mentioned. So there are transportation elements in Build Back Better as well. So whether we're talking about that bill that I hope and expect will be delivered, passed and signed in the weeks ahead, or whether we're talking about the bipartisan infrastructure law that's already underway now, we have a lot to talk about with the American people. And I do think we have a responsibility as cabinet members, as an administration, not just to get out there and implement these bills effectively, but to explain them and to make sure that people who, frankly, maybe don't have a lot of time to follow the ins and outs and blow by blow of what's going on Capitol Hill, to really understand the choices that were made and the results that are a consequence of that. So you're going to be seeing a lot of signs around the country that point to this Building a Better America line of effort that the president has initiated, so that there's no question in somebody's mind that when you're getting that new bridge, when you're getting that new interchange, when you're getting that new bike lane or port investment in your community or airport terminal in your town or whatever it is, that you understand why it was possible. And the reason it was possible is because we had this bipartisan vote. By the way, a lot of Republicans crossing over to join Democrats in this, and of course, because of the president's leadership.
So obviously, the holidays are coming up. Supply chains have been a very big issue. How satisfied are you with the progress that's been made at the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach? And do you think that the country has, made enough progress in the time that's been allotted, before this big shopping season?
So I've been very impressed by the work that's gone on in LA, Long Beach, and a lot of other ports, and across our administration with the work led by our ports envoy, John Procari, and my department and a lot of others working on this. Just to take one example, we just got word that recently that the Port of LA has seen the number of containers that have been dwelling for, I think it's more than 9 days, what's considered a long dwell container. Those are just sitting there taking up space. That's been cut by more than half since they started working on this just a matter of weeks ago by, I mean, we've been working the issue for a while, but arrived at some new tools like potential fees and incentives and sweeper ships picking up the empties. These measures, these interventions have clearly made a difference. I think it's important for people to understand this is not a story of the ports being less capable this year or moving fewer goods. On the contrary, they're moving more goods than ever. It's just that the demand is even higher. This Biden boom is real. You can see it in the recent retail numbers suggesting that even the highest forecasts are going to be exceeded, with retail sales this holiday season at an all-time record high. Of course, that's putting our supply chains to the test. And the way that there has been really creative problem solving, whether it's dealing with empty containers, moving to 24/7 operations, or creative ideas like inland pop-up container yards. They're doing this in Georgia, where if there's not enough room to sort and handle the containers on the port itself, they bring them inland and sort them out there. These kinds of solutions are going to make a big difference in the short term, while we all know that the long-term work of investing in first-rate infrastructure in our ports and rail and road and beyond is now going to be possible in a whole new way, thanks to this bipartisan law.
One of the long-term challenges is the human infrastructure of trucking, finding enough truck drivers, getting them licensed, getting them on the road. What else can the administration do to address that challenge?
So this is another example of where we got to take a short-term and long-term approach. In the short term, we are working to cut red tape. A lot of people who want CDLs, commercial driver's licenses, and get into that field are finding that it can take longer than it should to get up and running. We're working with state BMVs to clear out some of the clutter in the process. And there are other steps that we think we can take, including an apprenticeship program that's part of this bipartisan law that can help younger people get into the field when they want to. Having said that, there is a longer term set of issues we got to deal with, and it starts with listening to the truckers who are telling us about some of the obstacles they face. For example, at the ports, often they arrive at the port and find that they lose hours and hours of time because of how long it takes them to get an assignment to go pick up a container. And by the way, they're not compensated for that time because most truckers are paid by the load or by the mile, not by the hour, which is a serious problem if we want trucking to be a profession that is as rewarded and as respected as it is important. Those issues, I think, are what we have to tackle for a longer term view to really make sure that the profession and the human beings who actually operate our supply chains get the support, the respect, and the compensation that they deserve.
I want to talk about job creation surrounding this infrastructure bill. There have been some mixed reviews here in California among some experts. Some of the data, it's projecting that 75,000 to 100,000 jobs would be created each year. But a former director of the EDD said infrastructure projects are not rapid in job creation. How do you fix something like that?
Well, this is not about short-term injection of stimulus into the economy. This is about the long-term competitiveness of the United States of America. And so, there are other steps that have been taken to make sure that we do have that short-term action. It's one of the reasons why you saw unemployment claims, the numbers coming back today, reaching the lowest level, I think, since the 1960s. Extraordinary work that's been done to get us to this exceptionally low rate of unemployment that we have right now. But this infrastructure law, while we're proud of the job creation effect in the short and long term, it's not about getting through this quarter or doing something overnight. It is about making sure we set the long-term foundation so that for the rest of our lives, America is competitive. And that's not just about the jobs created digging the ditch to lay the pipe or building the bridge or fixing the interchange. Those jobs we're very excited about, especially because the majority of them don't require a college degree. But it's about the jobs that are created and supported for the person who rides that subway car that was installed, the person who gets to drive across that safer road that was laid in, the person who doesn't have to drive at all because they now have a better bus route to get to work, the small business that is going to flourish because it's next to a transit center that we were able to fund. Those jobs, over and above the jobs that are being created directly in the construction industry, are going to endure and they're going to flourish.
So I want to pull a question that was posted on our Facebook page for this live stream. One issue in California is a lot of highways and major roads travel through very rugged areas, and sometimes rock slides will block off these roads and cut off communities for short periods of time to long periods of time. We're thinking of Highway 1 in Big Sur, Highway 101 up in Northern California near Crescent City. Does the Department of Transportation have any plans to kind of address some of those issues and try to improve the safety of those vital arteries?
Yeah, absolutely. And to take one example, this is part of what we're getting at with a new program called Protect, which is a resilience program to help with things that are going to be needed that we weren't thinking about in the past, where there's an increased rate of mudslides or rock slides, especially when there's a single way to get in or out of a community. I know, for example, with the wildfires, this was part of the experience of Calaveras County, south of Sacramento, that there was this urgent need, obviously, for evacuation routes. And we need to be looking ahead to the increased extreme weather events and other impacts on our infrastructure that are going to come in the future, and recognize that the next 50 years that we're building for is not going to be like the last 50 years that we were building in.
So I just want to get a personal question in here. You recently became a father. You have twins at home. You're obviously, very busy out selling the Biden agenda and getting this infrastructure, playing a critical role in getting this infrastructure bill passed. Just a simple question. Are you sleeping?
Not much, but more than we were before. With twins, as parents of twins know, and tried to, people try to tell you, but then you actually experience it. We found in those early weeks that there was no point even trying to go to bed. We just resorted to a shift system. Now we're down to about 1 hour wake up between midnight and 6 in the morning or so, and that's a great time for me to look at news clips and memos for the day ahead. So I try to put it to good use. I finally mastered the art of having the kid in the bottle in one hand and the iPad in the other. Yeah, not a whole lot of sleep going on, but more than there was, so I won't complain.
Wait,
You're on mute.
Do we have one final question? We have 2 minutes left.
Well, I guess one of the things that's always on people's minds is earthquake safety in California. And obviously in the Bay Area, a lot of crisscrossing highways and bridges, and also in Los Angeles as well. What else should people look for as far as shoring up those projects?
Well, this is something that has to be integrated into the design of all of our infrastructure going forward. And this is not just something we want to make sure is attended to in the plans that are brought to the department for approval, or the way the formula dollars are used by the state. But this is also one of the reasons why our department takes its research role very seriously. Not a lot of people maybe think about our department as an R&D shop, but it is an important part of what we do. And whenever we can support universities, for example, working on creating construction materials that are more resilient to earthquakes or to other kinds of pressures, I think that's a very good use of federal dollars, because it could save not just money, but lives going forward.
All right. Well, I would like to thank all of you for joining us today. Thank you to Secretary Buttigieg for attending. Thank you to Nikki Lorenzo and Chris Majurian for hosting. I'd also like to thank our sponsors again, the California Alliance for Jobs. If you are not a member of the Sacramento Press Club, please consider joining and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.